At 12:30 in the morning, a young mother walked into a Missoula alley and never came home. By sunrise, her sons were waiting. By nightfall, panic set in. And within days, a family realized something unthinkable had happened. Jermain Charlo was not coming back. What no one understood yet was how fast this case would turn dark. She had gone out on June 15, 2018, doing something completely ordinary. Dinner, drinks, conversation. The kind of night no one remembers because nothing bad is supposed to happen. But by midnight, cameras captured her walking down an alley behind a bar with her ex-boyfriend, Michael Difference. That image would become the last confirmed sighting of Jermain alive. And this is where the story fractures. Because after that moment, every version of the truth begins to contradict itself. Difference said he dropped her off safely. Then he changed where. Then when. Then how. And while those explanations shifted, Jermain's phone went silent. Her family began calling, texting, driving the streets. Nothing. Her sons, Thomas and Jake, waited for a mother who never arrived. Hours turned into days. Days turned into terror. But what they didn't know was that investigators were already facing a critical problem. There was no body, no blood, no clear crime scene. Just one alley, one man, and one woman who never came home. And as hope faded, one question screamed louder than all others. If Jermain didn't walk away from her children, then who stopped her? And what happened in that alley would soon raise far more disturbing questions than anyone was prepared to answer. Jermain Charlo was not someone who abandoned her life. She was a mother. She was present. She was deeply connected to her family, especially her sons. That's why when she failed to return home, her family knew immediately this was not a choice. Something had gone wrong. And the deeper investigators looked, the more unsettling the night became. Jermain had visited 3 bars, including the Dark Horse, before ending up behind the Badlander. Surveillance footage showed her laughing, talking, alive. But as the night stretched on, witnesses placed her drinking heavily, vulnerable, tired. Still, she wasn't alone. She was with Michael Difference, the father of her children. Someone she trusted, or thought she did. And this is where things took a turn. Difference told Jermain's family he dropped her near Orange Street by the food farm. Later, he told police something completely different. A neighborhood 8 blocks away. 2 stories. Same night. Same woman. Both couldn't be true. Meanwhile, phone records revealed something chilling. Around 2 in the morning, both Jermain's phone and Difference's phone pinged a cell tower miles from downtown, near the Difference family home. That detail changed everything, because it suggested Jermain was never dropped off where Difference claimed. She was somewhere else, somewhere far more isolated, somewhere the cameras couldn't see. And while Difference insisted she walked away on her own, her family knew better. Jermain did not leave her children. She did not vanish into the night. But the truth was far more disturbing, because every new detail pointed back to the same person. And yet no arrest came, no charges, no closure, just silence. And as investigators hesitated, one haunting question remained unanswered. If Jermain was with him until the end, what happened after the cameras stopped rolling? As days passed without answers, Jermain's family did what law enforcement could not. They went public. Flyers appeared across Missoula. Vigils were held. Prayers were spoken into empty nights. Her grandmother wrote a letter that would break the hearts of everyone who read it. A message begging Jermain to survive. Promise that she was loved. A declaration that her family would never stop looking. That letter wasn't written for attention. It was written because hope was all they had left. But what they didn't know was how quickly this case would stall. Police questioned Difference. He cooperated. He denied harming her. Without a body, without forensic proof, investigators said their hands were tied. And that's where things got darker. Rumors began spreading. Allegations surfaced. Friends whispered about arguments, about jealousy, about a volatile relationship. Still, nothing could be proven. Meanwhile, time became the enemy. Each day that passed erased potential evidence. Rain washed streets clean. Trash was collected. Memory faded. and Jermain's sons grew older without answers. The case slowly slipped into cold case territory, despite the screams for justice. And that silence hit especially hard because Jermain was a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Indigenous women go missing at alarming rates. Too often, their cases are ignored, underfunded, forgotten. Her family feared the same fate, that Jermain would become another name without a resolution, another mother without justice. But the truth was far more disturbing, because somewhere, someone knew exactly what happened to her. And as years passed with no arrest, one chilling possibility grew harder to ignore. What if the reason there were no answers wasn't lack of evidence, but failure to act when it mattered most? And if that was true, then the real crime might not have ended that night. It might still be unfolding. By the second year, hope had changed shape. It was no longer about rescue. It was about truth. Jermain's family pushed investigators relentlessly, demanding re-interviews, new searches, renewed urgency. They refused to let her case fade. And slowly, pressure began to work. Police re-examined timelines. They revisited phone records. They looked again at Difference's movements that night. And this is where the contradictions deepened. Witnesses placed Difference in locations that didn't match his statements. Cell data suggested stops he never mentioned. And yet, none of it crossed the threshold for an arrest. Prosecutors wanted certainty. They wanted proof beyond doubt. But what they had was suspicion. Strong suspicion. The kind that follows you forever but never locks a cell door. And while law enforcement hesitated, the family endured something worse than grief. Uncertainty. Not knowing if Jermain had suffered. Not knowing if she was killed quickly or endured terror. Not knowing where her body was hidden. That psychological torture never ends. Meanwhile, community volunteers searched fields, rivers, forests. Dogs were brought in. Tips poured in. All dead ends. And that's where the case hit a wall. Years passed. Birthdays were marked with tears. Her sons grew taller. Her absence grew louder. And still no arrest. But behind the scenes, something was changing. Technology was evolving. Data that once seemed meaningless could now be reanalyzed. Patterns could be detected. Movements reconstructed. And what happened next changed everything. Because the same phone pings that once raised suspicion now began to tell a clearer story. A story of proximity, of opportunity, of deception. And for the first time in years, investigators quietly reopened the door they had once closed. And whoever had hoped this case was forgotten was about to realize one thing. Time does not erase the truth. It sharpens it. When investigators returned to Jermain Charlo's case, they weren't looking for new witnesses. They were looking at old lies. Every statement Michael Difference had given was placed under a microscope. Timelines were rebuilt minute by minute, and patterns began to emerge that could no longer be ignored. Difference's movements after midnight showed deliberate gaps. His phone activity suggested stops that didn't align with his story. And most importantly, Jermain's phone never moved independently after that final alley footage. That detail mattered, because it suggested she never walked away alone. Someone was with her until the end. But the truth was far more disturbing, because while investigators believed Jermain was killed, they still couldn't prove how, or where, or when. And without a body, every theory remained just out of reach. The case hovered in a legal gray zone, too strong to dismiss, too weak to prosecute, and that's where families lose faith. But Jermain's family refused. They spoke at rallies. They demanded federal involvement. They highlighted the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Slowly, their voices grew louder than the silence. And behind closed doors, prosecutors began considering a risky move. Charging without a body. It had been done before, rarely, carefully, and only when the circumstantial evidence formed a complete picture. So investigators kept building. Every inconsistency, every lie, every unexplained hour. And then, years after Jermain was last seen alive, that picture finally came together. Not enough to tell exactly what happened, but enough to say who was responsible. And when that decision was made, It sent shockwaves through everyone connected to the case. Because after years of waiting, one thing became clear. Someone was finally going to be held accountable. And the man who had changed his story again and again was about to face the one question he could never escape. Where is Jermain Charlo? In 2023, the unthinkable finally happened. Michael Diffrence was arrested and charged with deliberate homicide. No body, no confession, just years of evidence stitched together into one devastating accusation. Prosecutors said Jermain Charlo was killed sometime after leaving the alley with Diffrence. They argued her phone, her behavior, her devotion to her children proved she did not walk away. She was murdered, and Diffrence was responsible. The arrest sent shockwaves through Missoula. Some were relieved, others were skeptical. Defense attorneys immediately attacked the case, calling it speculation, circumstantial, incomplete. And this is where the battle truly began. The courtroom became the new crime scene. Every text, every ping, every witness was scrutinized. Prosecutors painted a picture of control, deception, and opportunity. The defense painted doubt, reasonable doubt. They argued without a body, without forensic proof, there could be no certainty. And for Jermain's family, the trial was unbearable. Every day meant reliving her last hours. Hearing strangers debate her fate as theory, as probability. But what they didn't know was how close the jury would come to a decision that would change everything. Because as the trial unfolded, it became clear how fragile justice can be without physical evidence. The jury deliberated. Hours passed, then days, and when the verdict finally came back, it stunned the room. Diffrence was acquitted. Not guilty. The words landed like a second death. For Jermain's family, it was devastating. Not because they believed the jury was evil, but because the system had failed them. Again, the man they believed killed Jermain walked free, and the question everyone feared returned. If this wasn't justice, then what was? And worse, if he didn't do it, then who did? And where was Jermain Charlo? After the acquittal, silence returned. Louder than before. The legal system had spoken, but it hadn't answered the most important question. Where was Jermain? Her family was left with grief layered on top of injustice. No conviction, no remains, no closure. And yet they refused to stop. They continued searching, continued speaking, continued forcing her name into the public eye. Because forgetting is the final death. And they would not allow that. Meanwhile, investigators were limited. Double jeopardy meant Diffrence could not be tried again for the same charge. The door had closed, permanently, unless new evidence emerged. And that's where the case now stands. Frozen, unresolved, but far from forgotten. Indigenous advocates continue to cite Jermain's case as a symbol of systemic failure, of how missing Indigenous women are treated, of how cases stall, of how answers slip away. But what they didn't know was how deeply this case would embed itself into public consciousness. Podcasts, documentaries, online investigators. Thousands of strangers began examining the same timelines, the same footage, the same lies. And while that hasn't led to an arrest, it has kept pressure alive. Because the truth has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Someone knows something, someone saw something, someone heard something. And until Jermain is found, that tension will never release. Her sons still wait, older now, carrying a loss they never deserved. And her grandmother's letter still echoes, a message of love written into the void. The kind of love that refuses to accept silence as an answer. Because even without a verdict, one truth remains. Jermain Charlo did not walk away from her life. And until the day her story is finished, this case remains open in the only place that truly matters. The minds of those who refuse to stop asking, what really happened that night? The most disturbing part of Jermain Charlo's case is not what is known. It's what isn't. There is a window of time, after midnight, where her fate was decided. No cameras, no witnesses, just two people and a road that leads away from answers. Investigators believe Jermain was killed, but without her body, the how remains a mystery. Strangulation, blunt force, something else entirely. Each possibility carries its own horror, and that uncertainty is a weapon. It robs families of peace, protects the guilty, feeds doubt. But what they didn't know at the time was how common this pattern is. Indigenous women go missing, cases stall, suspects walk free, and communities are left screaming into silence. Jermain's case fits that pattern too well, which is why her family continues to fight. They demand land searches, river searches, federal oversight. They refuse to let the story end in a courtroom verdict. Because a verdict without truth is just paper. And somewhere, there is ground that holds answers. Somewhere, there is evidence waiting to be found. The passage of time has not erased it. It has only hidden it deeper. And history shows that cold cases break when no one expects it. A tip, a confession, a mistake. All it takes is one crack. And until that moment comes, this case remains a wound that never heals. A reminder that justice is not automatic. It must be forced, fought for, and remembered, because the worst outcome isn't that no one was convicted. It's that people stop caring. And that is something Jermain's family will never allow. Her name continues to be spoken. Her face continues to be shared. Her story continues to be told. And as long as that happens, this case is not over. It's waiting. Years after Jermain Charlo was last seen alive, the questions still haunt Missoula. Late-night streets, empty alleys, the places where answers should have been found but weren't. Investigators admit mistakes were made. Time was lost. Opportunities slipped away. And in true crime, early hours matter most. Evidence fades. Alibis solidify. And silence hardens into immunity. That reality makes this case even more painful, because many believe it could have been solved. And now it may never be. But the story refuses to die. Every anniversary reignites attention. Every article brings new eyes. And every retelling exposes the same uncomfortable truth. Someone got away with something. Whether by design or by system failure, justice was denied. And that's where the public becomes part of the story. Online investigators analyze footage frame by frame. They map phone towers. They debate timelines. Some believe Difference is guilty. Others believe the truth is still hidden elsewhere. But all agree on one thing. Jermain deserves answers. Her sons deserve answers. And the community deserves accountability. Because unresolved cases don't just disappear. They linger. They shape trust. They define whether people believe the system works. And in this case, belief is fragile. But what happened next may surprise you. Because unresolved doesn't mean inactive. Investigators can still act on new evidence. Searches can still happen. And witnesses can still come forward. Fear fades with time. Guilt doesn't. And history has shown that people talk when they think no one is listening. So the question isn't whether this case will ever be solved. It's when. And who will finally break the silence. Because the truth about what happened to Jermain Charlo exists. It always has. And one day it may finally surface. Jermain Charlo was a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter. She was loved. And her life mattered. On one ordinary night, that life was taken. And the world moved on without answers. But her family did not. They carried her memory through years of uncertainty, legal defeat, and unbearable waiting. They learned that justice is not guaranteed. It must be demanded. Again and again. Her story is not just about a crime. It's about what happens after. About systems that fail. About voices that are ignored. About how silence becomes its own kind of violence. And yet, this is not the end. Because stories like Jermain's do not close neatly. They remain open, unresolved, pressing against the conscience of everyone who hears them. Somewhere, there is someone who knows the truth. Someone who has stayed quiet for years. Someone who thinks time has erased their responsibility. But time does not erase guilt. It sharpens it. And as technology advances, as attention grows, as pressure builds, that truth becomes harder to contain. Jermain's sons will continue to grow. Her family will continue to speak. And her name will continue to be said. Not as a statistic, not as a headline, but as a person who deserved to come home. The question of what happened to Jermain Charlo remains unanswered. But unanswered does not mean unsolvable. It means unfinished. And until the day her story reaches its conclusion, this case stands as a reminder that behind every unsolved crime is a family still waiting, still hoping, still fighting. And if justice ever comes, it will be because they refused to let the world forget.